Okay, so we're here to talk about decarbonisation in schools. So I just wanted to do a little introduction and then I'll hand over to our first presenter, Louise Robson from Count Your Carbon. So I don't know how many of you are aware, but often when we talk about decarbonisation in a sort of commercial sense, they talk about these scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. So I just wanted to clarify what this meant in case you're not sure, but some of you may be aware. But scope 1 emissions are the direct emissions from sources that are owned or controlled by an organisation. So you know, fuel consumption on site, say gas heating, oil heating, if your school happens to have oil, or, you know, the fuel that goes into your minibus, that would fall under your scope 1 emissions. And then you've got scope 2, which is your indirect emissions. So things like your heating. So, you know, you're not using the fuel on site, but you are, fuel could be being used somewhere else to provide you with a service, electricity consumption and any steam consumption. And then we've got these scope 3 emissions. So they're indirect emissions resulting from the activities of your organisation that are not included in scope 2. So this diagram includes things like waste disposal, purchase goods and business travel. Now, I don't know how many of you use a plane to travel to school, but I'm just wondering if we could spend a little bit of time, if you've got access to the keyboard, to just write down, in terms of scope 3 emissions, what do you feel in schools falls into that category? So just a little bit of time. You can either shout it out or you can write it in the chat, but what types of things could we think about in terms of our scope 3 emissions in schools? Feel free to shout out if you've not got access to the keyboard.
I can't seem to make the chat work. I can't get my cursor to go to type
okay.
it.
Okay, Casey.
Yeah. I was going to write. I'm not engaging. I just haven't got a clue. I'll be honest. I don't know what the scope 3 are for.
Okay. Okay. Well, so I've written some ideas down. So we'll have a look. So things like commuting. Yeah. So although some people might think that doesn't fall within the remit of the school in terms of you know, their influence, the truth is it is kind of, you can influence that, and in fact the government require that everyone does a transport survey every year, I think it is. So that is something that schools can try and think about and address and maybe encourage greener choices. But the other big one that's often missed out is staff commuting. So often staff commute further and therefore have higher carbon emissions. And again, some people would say, is it possible to change? But it might be that there's certain things schools can do to try and encourage staff to commute in a greener way, potentially encourage car sharing or public transport use. Trips and visits. So this is kind of a new area, but some schools are taking quite, you know, they're making proactive choices like minimizing or even banning the amounts of flights they take as for their trips and visits, or just trying to minimize the travel that actually happens within those trips and visits. You've got canteen waste, which obviously you can try and address. You can try and compost, or you can try and recycle more. But you've also got things like packed lunch waste. So I know a lot of primary schools are promoting, you know, a zero waste packed lunch and trying to get people to use reusable pots and, you know, large shareable packs of crisps and things like that. So they're trying to minimize their emissions that way. And then I just wanted to highlight behavior change. So if we can get our students and our school community to think differently about their choices, we can have a wider influence that goes beyond the school grounds. So, you know, minimizing community emissions, getting them to make healthier choices and more positive choices for the planet. But also we're dealing with very young people. So if we can get them to change their behavior while they're very young, we're talking about, you know, a knock-on effect of having those lifetime emissions reduced. So I just wanted to highlight that we often think about decarbonisation in terms of those direct things, you know, turning the heating off and reducing our electricity use, you know, making sure we turn the light switches off. But there's also massive scope to make changes within the school context to support the reduction of scope 3 emissions.